We're live, everybody.
Okay. I'm going to share the flag. All right. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That was not our best work. Great. Okay, welcome, everybody. What'd you say, Joanne?
I was going to say, let me know when you want me to start.
Oh, sure. Welcome, everybody. So tonight is an opportunity to really hear the last two presentations, which is program and technology, and then an update on where we are with our revenue and expenditures. As a reminder, as we move into the meeting 2 weeks from now, we really need to be zeroing in and coming to some type of agreement on our expenditure for next year, which is what will be proposed to the public, and in order to meet our timelines. So now is a great time to ask questions, and what that'll do is it'll best prepare us to be able to have everything that you'll need, feel comfortable for our proposal when we come back together in 2 weeks. Joanne's going to start with an update on our expenditures and revenue, and then Bill will go, and then we'll finish up with program.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I won't have any problems this time. Mind you, I'm home. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Right now, I'm going to give you a snapshot of where we are with our current spending. Everything, there are some things that are not in the budget right this minute, but what we've talked about so far earlier in the earlier presentations, technology is in this figure. You'll hear about that this evening. I want to let you know that right now what we're proposing for 21-22 is $48.1 million. Our current budget that we sit in today is $48,677.62. It represents a significant decrease, or a large decrease, of about $547,000 right now. At
Joanne?
1 point, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're still on the first slide. I didn't know if you intended to progress the slideshow, or if it's showing on a different screen and we can't see it.
Okay, that's wonderful. Hold on.
There we go.
Now, all right, I'm going to leave it like this. Sorry.
That's fine.
So again, right now the difference in spending is down from the current year we sit in to what we're proposing for next year. And I wanted to give you some of the key reasons why there's such a decrease. Right now, we are dealing with a large number of out-of-district placements that have either graduated or aged out over the last 2 years. Or this past year we have 10, but over the last 2 years we have at least 12 that have aged out. Right now we have 23 retirees across all bargaining units. And again, we have been doing an ongoing review of expenditure codes, reductions based on historical spending, and making reductions wherever we can. I wanted to give you an overview right now where we are. Then as a brief snapshot of what is included in this current expenditure line that you just saw. Again, we talked earlier about a stipend for a purchasing agent in the business office. Somebody would be able to assist all the buildings with purchasing procedures and policies, on-site training. Currently, it's myself and Sue Harrison. But again, it needs a lot more attention. It needs one person to focus on consortium spending, reaching out, making sure we get the best price, making sure that the staff does what they have to do, take the load off of some of the leaders, and have somebody designated in the business office to be able to assist with that. We're also allowing for another business office person. We're still down 2 FTEs from where we were several years ago, and where I had great hope that we wouldn't need another person. And we'll talk about the whys of that later on in this presentation, but I still think it would be beneficial to get another body in the business office. But again, that's already in these figures. When we presented the operations and maintenance budget a few presentations ago, this figure, that the expenditure figure, includes 2 additional full-time custodial workers, 1 ground/custodial worker. Again, anything that Bill talked about as far as pavement repairs, additional pool filter, he talked about the need for additional snow removal equipment. And one of the things he also wanted to do was to have our snow removal rentals a month earlier, because he gets very nervous when it gets to be November. We don't start that until November. If we have a big significant snowstorm in October, we certainly will be behind the 8 ball. And those were all talked about a couple. We can go over them again if you'd like. And then the other thing that's part of this budget, the figures that you've seen today as far as total spending, does include technology. And Bill Schramm is going to talk about some of the technology increases in a few minutes, the whys and where we are right now. But I also wanted you to see where our current revenue is. Now we're in a different position this year. Our revenue right now meets or exceeds what our spending is. So when you look at that revenue slide at the bottom, what's in yellow, that would be the figure that we don't know what it's going to be at. That would be appropriated fund balance. But again, I would like to tell you what we're assuming as far as revenue goes. I took the approach that there's not going to be a consolidation of the expenditure-driven aids. I'm going to separate it out like I did earlier for you. And that's what I believe will end up with the state budget. I don't know that to be true. And if it does go the other way and there is a consolidation of those state aids, that just means that the state aid figure will be higher than this one is right now. It's not going to be lower. It would be higher. As we go into the next meeting, we'll talk about CARES 3 and how that's going to impact anything. It's not going to have an impact on the 21-22 budget, but hopefully we'll have more information that we can give you, other information about CARES 3. I know it's been out there, it's been talked about, and we'll go through that as well. But right now, it just assumes what we know. It also leaves our property tax levy at 0, the same dollar amount it was in the current year. That's a win for our taxpayers. We don't have to increase taxes. We leave it the same. Our pilot revenue is what we have right now. Foundation aid, BOCEs, all those aids are what we pretty much talked about the last time when we talked about revenue. The only thing I have changed is I've reduced transportation aid. And I did that based on some assumptions. We got a worksheet that we could go in and project our transportation aid based on what we know now and see where it's going to be, because that's one of those things that when you project and you're spending for the current year we sit in, we make projections when we file our ST3, which is that large financial report, and we have everything in there. Well, now what I've done is I've taken what I think we're going to spend in transportation, plugged it into this worksheet, which has reduced our transportation aid for the next year. I'm not surprised by that. And again, it's not 100%, but I reduced it a little bit from where it was. Building aid, we know, is a good number. And that CARES stimulus money, that $1.6 million towards the bottom of that sheet, right above the reserves money, that is the CARES 2 money. And we talked about that a while ago. It's been a while. So what the governor said is that the federal government is going to give you aid, and that's what they're giving us, $1.696 million. He was going to reduce state aid by that amount to help New York State close the gap. What the only piece that I am unsure of right now is, it's stupid, but it's how it's going to play out accounting-wise for us. There was an initial discussion that they want us to reduce the STAR amount, but that is linked directly to our tax levy. It should hit the foundation aid. That's really the only place we should offset it. So we've had a lot of discussions in business officials about how we're going to account for that 1.6 million. Either way, it's still a revenue. It still plays a factor in how the money that we're going to get to budget. And and we'll get it. It'll be interesting to see how we're going to account for it, and I will share that when we finally have an answer. And the way that state of New York goes, I probably won't have an answer for a little while. Did I just phase it out and come back? Or am I still good? Because everybody went to circles for a minute.
You're good. You're good. Bray had raised his hand.
Yes, Bray.
So I've got two questions. One, I thought I heard that the federal government was going to bail out New York State, and therefore the governor wouldn't need to take back this the aid money. Is that wrong, or is that something new that's still coming out?
I have not heard that yet, Bray.
Okay.
I wonder if they mean that's going to be part of the CARES 3, which I believe is another 2.3 million.
Okay, I don't know. I just heard that the state was getting like 15 million or 15 billion from the federal government, and then I was hoping that would not, then he wouldn't have to roll back the aid to replace the CARES money, but I don't know how accurate that is. Does this mean we're looking to go out at a zero budget?
Yes. A zero. Go ahead.
So that means we're not coming close to our tax cap, right?
No.
Is that going to be handicapping to us in the future? Because we always said if we don't come near the 2% levy, then, or the 2% increase or whatever, then years down the road, it's going to hurt us.
It can hurt you, but right now with the way our tax cap is that it's 1.72%. And next, it's the tax cap right now is 1.72%. So we have plenty of fund balance, which helps us that. Now it's odd that this year our tax cap calculation, the maximum, we're going to have that the amount that's allowable carryover. So I'll be going over that in the next meeting on the 14th on how that carryover. There's going to be a small carryover. I think it's about $300,000 and how that will play into everything. I would be concerned, Bray, if we didn't have the level of fund balance we have, but we will be okay as far as this 1 year hit. I think it's what we need to do because of our level of fund balance. We're not going to lose thousands of dollars that we'll never get over, but I will give you a 3-year snapshot of where our tax cap is at the 14th. Okay. We did look at that. And then in the reserves here, that $400,000 is going to be a combination of reserves that we start to target every single year, and it's going to be part of the TRS reserve and the ERS reserve. We are allowed to fund those, great, but we don't want to be in a position where they just continue to grow and grow and grow. We have a cap on the TRS. It can't exceed 5 years worth of salaries. We'll never get to there, but I just wanted to let you know that. So we'll budget $400,000. We will replenish those reserves if there's funds available, and we'll watch those. We go over the fund balance every year. We adopt it, and I'll show you what it is and tell you what it is at the end of the school year. The one thing we don't know right now is how much fund balance we will need to balance the budget. Right now, 1.4 is too much to balance the budget, but we don't have a spending plan yet. So that's the only variable as far as revenue goes right now. And if you remember, we talked about a capital reserve amendment. We are going to be asking our voters to amend our capital reserve. The current capital reserve was established in 2014. They run for 10 years. So the original one was supposed to expire in 2024. We do have some unappropriated fund balance that is in excess of the 4%. So if we lift that limit on the capital reserve from 5 million to 8 million, it gives us a $3 million window that we could put more into that capital reserve. Again, we just finished a building condition survey. Good news, we got approval for phase 3. We're hoping to have that on Thursday or Friday. That's wonderful news. And so that having a capital reserve allows us to plan better as we go into whatever we do in the future. We'll have this money that we can offset the local share. I just wanted to remind people it's been a while since we talked about that. We're also going to talk about the technology budget. We've invited Mr. Schramm here this evening to kind of help us go through this. It's not a lengthy presentation, but I'm going to turn it over to him, give you a layout of what his staffing is, and then
All right, guys. I just want to take a minute to kind of recap where we've been this year as far as technology goes, just so you understand some of the challenges that we have had. We started out in back over the summertime. We received around 1,050 Chromebooks for students, staff, and teachers. Most of those, 800 of those, went to students. So we transitioned away from our previous CART style program of Chromebooks within the classroom, and we gave every student a one-to-one device that they are responsible for. Same thing with staff. We gave every teacher, every instructional support staff member Chromebook so that they could support the students both in the classroom and in the distance learning model, the complete remote instruction model. And so as a result of that, you're going to see some changes to the budget for a replacement plan for these devices. And also, as part of our remote learning model, we had to increase our software subscriptions to have programs that would support students remotely. So those are things we'll talk about tonight as we'll go through some of the changes to the budget. Real quick, we are going to add a different level support technician. We're looking for somebody that's more of a networking server support person, somebody that could help with our additional wireless access needs and also assist on the server side as well. Then you would see an increase of that for about $49,000. The next thing is the Chromebook replacement program. So again, like I said before, as we transition over to the one-to-one deployment, we need to put all those devices now into a 5-year replacement plan. The devices age out based on their processor. They become no longer supported. So it's not like the PCs where we could kind of drag it out an extra year or two if we really needed to. Google stops sending out updates for those devices with a hard stop on that threshold. So it's something that we can't really ignore if we want to be successful with this program. So you're going to see a line item for $120,000 to support that replacement cycle. And basically what we'll do is replace 1/5 of the Chromebooks per year over the next 5 years. The hardware, our PC hardware, has decreased. You're going to see a decrease of about $70,000 across all 4 buildings. Again, we're with transitioning to this one-to-one program. Some of the computer labs have gone away. We no longer really have a need to have 2 computer labs in the elementary schools or 3 computer labs in the middle school. So as part of that, those are less PCs that we have to replace and to maintain. So we can definitely, we can decrease there. The software licensing, there's an increase from last year of about $48,000. We don't know what next year is going to look like. Whether we're still going to have to provide remote instruction for families. So we still need to plan to continue with the model that we have right now. I think as we move forward and things stabilize more, we can scale that back. But at least to plan going into next year, we need to continue to support the programs that we currently have. BOCE's increase of $87,000. Again, the hardware and software subscriptions will come from that. And then supplies, there was a slight increase of about $10,000. And that is to cover the cost of the maintenance on the Chromebooks, battery replacements, screen replacements, keyboard replacements, that sort of thing. So I think in that previous slide, we had, Joanne, the actual breakdown. So the overall equipment for district computer equipment line goes from $57,000 to $177,000. I do anticipate we'll purchase the Chromebooks through BOCEs, which will capture aid on. We purchased those through BOCEs last year. And then You'll see the $37,000 hardware lines for each building. Those have been reduced across the board. That'll cover PC replacement cycles, which again, we have all our PCs on a 5-year replacement plan. We did forego some of the replacement this year in order to fund the Chromebook purchases for this year. So we are playing catch up with that a little bit. You'll see the obviously the increase to the software line, like we talked about, to support some of these subscriptions for remote learning. And then the increase in the supply line and the BOCES line as well, as we discussed.
The only thing I'd like to draw your attention to on the overview and the writing, we have the increase at 49,116 for the server, for the support for the student help desk and the network server. We were able to reduce that to 29,116 because if we do use a teacher assistant to help support that, it won't be an add to the budget. It's an existing staff person. So I wanted to be clear on that. I just clarified that this evening. So again, the changes to technology while they're large, they're not over the top. And what we need to do as far as the equipment for the 120,000, the reason that's not in a hardware line, oddly enough, Chromebooks really aren't ticketed as hardware. So that's going to have its own budget line in the computer. It's going in the budget system. It's going to be Chromebook replacement. Because they're a supply, we are concerned that we track them for insurance purposes. But again, they don't have an equipment line because their value themselves puts it in a material and supplies. It's one of those odd things that we have to account for a little differently. But again, that's your technology budget. And that was our presentation for technology this evening, Brian. So I can turn it over to you. Unless anybody has any questions. Teddy has a question. Go ahead, Teddy.
Yeah, something else I wanted to ask. I know new this year we ended up putting the cameras in the gym. So I want to make sure that we budget for any possible new things next year. Like if it is possible we could put cameras, I know we talked about concerts or the auditorium or outside football fields, anything we possibly could. I just want to make sure that we include that in the budget, that if we have to make any purchases, that,
Okay.
It's there. I mean, I think it caught us all off guard. I mean, 3 months ago, you probably had no idea we needed to put a camera in a gym, but we managed to make it happen, and it was great. I just want to make sure we budget for anything new we may need.
Yep, the football field or turf field camera is coming. I did confirm that with Mr. Dorrance, and then we'll work around whatever we can as far as the concerts and some of the other athletic events as well.
Yeah, and do we have to increase like any Wi-Fi coverage or anything like that?
Well, each situation is a little bit unique, so I don't anticipate anything in the building would need an increase. Where things might be challenging is on like the softball field, the baseball field at Peter B. That's where things are going to get a little bit trickier, but we'll address it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Tina, you had your hand raised?
I did, yeah. Actually, it's two questions around that equipment line. So I guess I'm a little confused. Where was our large investment in the 1-to-1 for where we are now? Because it doesn't appear like that's part of 2021. Was that actually last year's budget?
No. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so we did purchase the Chromebooks in last year's budget. We pulled the trigger on that order in early April. And
so
the
that
reason
57 includes the purchase of that large increase?
they wouldn't have come out of that line. I think that's just where Joanne has them earmarked for now. So they were purchased through BOCES, so they would have come out of the BOCES line. And the reason we purchased them out of the prior year's budget is that was the only way that we would have them on time. A lot of schools this year really struggled. Didn't get their devices until January or February. And unfortunately, by us ordering them in April, we ended up with them in June and July, and we were able to get them out in time.
Okay.
So
and the other question I have is what number is approximately 20% for the replacement? How many are you targeting to cycle through each year?
Total number of devices, 450 to 500 devices.
I'm sorry, for total for that year or for the total?
The total for the year would be 450 to 500 devices. Are we looking for a dollar total?
No. The number of actual devices in your replacement plan.
Chromebooks would be 450 to 500 devices per year.
Okay. So we have roughly 2,500 in circulation?
We do.
Okay, wow.
Between students, faculty, and, extras that are in the building for, students that come without their device. We have some shelf stock to rotate out in case one breaks. We do an instant replacement. So if a parent calls and says my child's having trouble with their Chromebook, we say, okay, bring it in. We'll replace it on the spot. The whole, we've tried to make this as uninterruptive as possible, in our efforts to support remote learning. So we do have some shelf stock as well. I think you'll see.
What does one of them cost?
New devices, a hair over $200, $209.
Okay.
And we were fortunate to be able to purchase them last year, Tina, because we didn't have the spending that we did. So we were fortunate, and we got additional aid on it because of that.
Okay, thank you.
The Budget Advisory Committee met over 5 weeks for basically 7.5 hours, a little bit longer than that. We had a couple nights where it went a little bit over. And the overwhelming focus on by that committee was on the future. The real reason why it's important to note that is when we're presenting tonight, what we're going to present to you is really the a summary of what was presented to them. We're not going to present 7.5 hours of material to you. Instead, we're going to give you some detail around what we promised we'd do with money from the past 3 years, the large-scale initiatives, especially the ones that we've had so much engaging conversation around. We want to share information and data around that. The committee didn't have an opportunity to do that because it wasn't relevant to them at the moment. So we're going to share that with the board. And then we're going to give you an overview of what we discussed at the committee, and we're going to specifically focus with you on those things that will have a budgetary impact between this year and next year. And when I say that, basically the categories within these plans were professional development, materials or supplies, equipment, furniture, additional staffing, money for stipends or salaries, and money for field trips. And we're trying to make a little mental transition here. So this is not branded at all, but we've been talking a lot about why we're doing any of this work. And what we really know is our work is around the 3 E's. When our students leave, they need to be ready to do one of these 3 things. And basically, in the end, we expect everyone to be employed in some way, shape, or form, but they might choose to go to school first, or they might choose to go into the military first. So we've been dabbling with some ideas like the EEE offsite learning. When our students go somewhere, when they go to Stanton Farm, or they go to the chip factory, they should be learning and augmenting what they're doing in their classroom. So I go bravely forward. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, as I said, we're going to talk in depth about where we've come, and we're going to give you generalities about where we want to go with some of the budgetary impacts around that. So these are big ideas that we spend a lot of time discussing in the past 3 years. We talked about our technology integration. And our instructional technologist has offered dozens of professional development opportunities both during the summer and school year for our new and existing staff. And she's in charge of evaluating providing assistive technology to over 100 students with disabilities. That number changes depending on the year and depending on the needs of kids. And she's created a parent university webpage that has an abundance of resources to help our students and families. I don't know if you've seen the page. It's right on the big gold bar on our homepage. And it has videos to help people do basically anything in their Chromebook, answer questions, a means of communicating with staff if they need it. But it has been, obviously it's an invaluable resource, and in no year has it been more valuable than this year. And we created that position originally by utilizing an existing staff member and repurposing one of our library and media specialists. Last year marked our first year of our partnership with Northern Rivers, and they actually have a social worker on site with 2 offices, one in the middle school in Peter B. They run a satellite mental health clinic here. Families who would have ordinarily not had access at all, or would have had to go to Albany or further to get assistance like this. This is right in-house, and they switched to virtual when we had the pandemic, of course. And we're able to have students from the high school, middle school, and Peter B participate in it. And the biggest reason for that is it's the Albany County Department of Health that authorizes them to do this work, and they're very, very stringent about how the access is made. They don't want children transported to the clinician. They're allowing us to walk across the parking lot from the high school to the middle school, and they're allow us another office in Peter B. But right now we can't access the students at Becker because we're not allowed to transport them. We didn't get a chance to fully, engage in this in the way that we would have wanted to. We would love to have gotten more feedback about it through our first year of work. But this is the $36,000 version. We partnered with BOCES. It's an aidable event, which means we get about 46% of that $36,000 back for this partnership. And there's a couple different ways to implement programs like this. If we felt as though we got really good value from this one, we might do a second partnership, or we can do one that has a lower level where the school district doesn't participate financially at all, but then we don't have an opportunity to have access to the clinician in the same way. But we have about 20 to 24 students who've been enrolled working with this satellite mental health facility since its inception. We talked about threat assessments, especially around some of the behavioral issues that were coming to light last year. And we have partnered with a screener called Close Gap. Every family received a notice that we would be having students fill out this survey, which is a daily or a weekly survey, which basically just assesses where they are emotionally at any given time. And they're age appropriate, or they're geared by age, asking about bullying, stresses at school or home, and challenges they may be facing. And what that does is it gives us data so that our committees can make changes around program, or actually directly intervene with our student support services if that appears as though that's something that we need to do. This is a BOCES aidable expense, and although in this first year we had a lot of, I can't say a lot, Fred might know the exact percentage, but we did have a fair number of families opt out because they probably weren't sure what it is, or they didn't want their children to be asked how their day was. So ideally, with a little bit more being ingrained into our culture and people's level of comfort, they may be more willing to participate. Fred, do you have any idea of percentages?
We have about half of our students at our elementary schools who are participating in this regularly. Not as many as at our middle school and high school. We've actually had students with permission from their parents, obviously, but they actually wanted to be part of this. But I don't have hard percentages for the secondary.
Okay. So about 50% or less. So as you imagine, it's not a perfect measure, but it can do some good to help with school culture. We know that 3 years ago we made a specific choice to up our game around communication. We increased our partnership with BOCES to a Tier 4, what they call a Tier 4 partnership. We have someone in district 4 days a week, as well as we're backed by all of the resources that BOCES has, their print shop and things like that. They help us with our calendar, our newsletters, our high school course guide, and you see the quality of those types of publications. The cost for the service after aid is about $72,000 a year. And before that, we get back about 40% in aid. It's about $127,000 beforehand, about $72,000 after. And of course, we've migrated to a new website, and we have some new communication services in district around that. And the last thing was the creation of the position for Assistant Director of Student Sports Services. We did this with the clear vision in mind that our director would be retiring in the fall of 2021. And during her time in the position, she's facilitated hundreds of committee and special education meetings, provided continuity of message. She's participated in observations of our staff. Her presence has actually lightened the load for our psychologists who were doing many of the CSE meetings. I will note that because we have an absence in our department right now, our psychologists are assisting. But last year, they were able to do more of the work that they're accustomed to doing in our buildings. Fred's going to talk a little bit more about the position later, but she's also been pretty instrumental in helping to organize our multi-tiered systems of supports, which you'll hear about in basically every presentation for every building, and brought in a diagnostic, working on some diagnostic reading instruction, which has been one of our greatest weaknesses for our students with disabilities. Consistent, systematic, explicit, multi-sensory diagnostic reading system so that we are sure we're measuring the right things and our students are making the gains they need to. And lastly, this was done with just under $20,000. We had a teacher who was on an instructional assignment, who was being paid additional days to work during the summertime, and worked a teacher day, 7:30 to 2:40 or 8:35 to 3:30. And we did it for the transition to an administrative position was just under $20,000. Do you have any questions about those initiatives that we've done, large initiatives we've done in the last 3 years? All right, Fred's going to delve into the elementary school.
So as Mr. Schramm talked about, we were forced into implementing our one-to-one Chromebook program a bit earlier, a bit sooner than we planned. And though it's on a hiatus for this year, we're going to continue to utilize our STEAM stations, which we'll talk about a little bit more in both our elementary schools as well. So we reinvented and thought innovatively about our libraries, as you know, 2 years ago, and created these STEAM stations. So a lot of technology and science-based learning that's going on with that. As Dr. Bailey alluded to, we've partnered not only with our own cap region BOCES, but Questar 3. They have a partnership that allows us to really facilitate and encourage community and business partners for career exploration, and then to also do service learning and things of that nature. This was K-12, but for elementary folks especially, we had our PBL coach last year, and she really helped to utilize that partnership to do a lot of work around STEAM. Our STEAM teachers as well utilized that partnership with Questar to do that work. Most recently, so that service hasn't stopped. We've been utilizing that service to do some virtual field trips for our district-wide science, technology, engineering, arts, and music team, which is STEAM. I should have started with that, the acronyms. Dr. Bailey mentioned our close gap and the Northern Rivers satellite. I also wanted to just remind everyone that we have fully integrated character education program in elementary called Second Step. We were able to continue that this year as well, knowing that it was vital for our students to participate in that character education program. So we were able to do that, and I'll mention it later, but we were able to do that in our middle school, which means 5th grade as well, was able to do some of that. In K-12, so this includes our middle school and high school, we started to begin training with restorative practices and are looking at implementing some more of those strategies around restorative practices as we finish this year and go into next year as well. Or the next one, really. Thanks. So that combination of our STEAM stations and then our PBL coach supporting teachers really allowed for classes to spend a lot of time on project-based, inquiry-based type of projects. Our PBL coach, project-based learning or problem-based learning, they'll sometimes hear as well, assisted with the integration of that type of teaching within daily lessons. Before the pandemic, she was really making some really great relationships with staff, and folks were inviting her in to do a lot of work. She was doing things like beginning to implement and redesign gardens at our elementary school, and then also diving into some things around environmental studies. This pictures of them tapping a maple tree for maple syrup, which was really, again, kind of breathed some new life into that next year. The projects were rooted, unintended, in next-gen standards. We're looking at adding, where appropriate in the future, new standards that just came out from New York State around computer science and digital fluency to that as well, to make sure we're covering that in our elementary grades. All of this, with the addition of the community partners, really created this real-world experience for our students. And I know both elementary schools were looking outside of just STEM, kind of how this affects the greater good, that social justice aspect to STEAM. We have gotten a lot of feedback, especially since we were unable to continue with STEAM this year because of the reallocation of staff members. We've gotten a lot of feedback that students and families are missing that. They really had a huge enthusiasm for STEAM. But fingers crossed, we're going to be able to return those staff to those positions, hopefully in the fall. The funds allocated for all of this, for all these programs, were within our 2021 budget, and we're going to continue that funding for our 21-22 as well. Brian, you're muted.
Darn it, I thought I was going to make it through without it. Just as a reminder, SSS stands for Student Support Services, which is the part of our organization that supports our students with disabilities. Here's a compressed version of the areas that we focused on during our budget advisory committee meetings, and really what we believed we need for our students UPK5 in the next few years. So both this slide and the next slide, I'm just going to allow you to read them, and then I'll allow you to ask questions. And the next slide is the same items, but with some of the actions that we're interested in doing around them. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed knowing that. So it's the same focus areas. As we described the implementation of our different actions at the elementary school, we thought it'd be important to note that some of them may be realized differently in each building because there's different individual students and staff and levels of training and where the schools are in the community in general. It's also important to note that throughout all the building presentations, some of these things will simply not be able to implement it in 1 year. There'll be multiple years around how they're implemented. I just want to speak briefly about the first one on the list. We've been thinking very reflectively about how to meet the needs of kids who have maybe had learning loss over this pandemic. And one of the ideas was to have teachers teaching in their individual grades, but partnering together so that kids could move fluidly across a grade. So if a student was ahead in one area, they could move into the higher classroom. If they're behind in one area, move into another classroom. But that will require a level of planning on the part of our staff and training to get to a place where they're comfortable around that. Do you have any questions about any of these proposed programs?
Brian, I have a question. You're looking at, bringing kids up to grade level, and I think we're definitely going to have that challenge after this year not being in school. So I'll just, for an example, use a kid's going into third grade next year, but he still has to catch up on some of the work from second grade. And we're going to work on trying to get him up to the third grade level. So it's almost like they're doing extra work, I guess, is what we're hoping to accomplish.
Fred can speak to it too, but every grade level, every discipline is going to be exactly in that boat, Teddy. Everybody's going to have to do a year plus a little bit. There was so much discussion around priority standards when we went into the pandemic, where New York State said, pare it down, just do the priority standards. What we're gonna be continuing that process. We're gonna have to decide and prioritize what we believe is the essence of what will prepare a kid not just for third grade, but for seventh, because the stuff they start learning in third comes to fruition 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's going to have to be some monstrous articulation for us to prioritize. In this instance, a student who may be well behind in math could go to a second grade classroom to get components of that lesson to get caught up. But like I said, there's a lot of the program that needs to be sussed out with the people who will be doing the work.
And just to add, I think assessment, more than ever, assessment to inform us on the gaps where students are coming in is going to be really crucial, so that we can see where that falls. We can think creatively about placement for students as well. One of the things we would like for teachers to be able to do is not necessarily curriculum work, but to be able to compare standards, let's say it's a second grade or third grade, kind of put those progressions next to each other so they can see the things that students need to get to. The other thing with Next Gen, similar to Common Core, is that they spiral. So oftentimes something that you might see in second grade, you'll see again in third grade. So is there a way to be smart about that type of work? So we are having those conversations. The assessment piece is big for us. We want to make sure that we're assessing students.
How's that going to work, do you think, with like Regents exams and things like that with kids in like high school? So obviously a kid that's in ninth grade right now, they're going into 10th grade next year, and at the end of the year possibly have a Regents exam. Now, I guess I look at, is it going to be normal 10th grade Spanish next year? No, I would assume we still have to play a little bit of catch up. Do you guys foresee anything with like the Regents exams maybe adapting to not being so tough, I guess, on whatever grade or whatever class, because of the tough times we had this year?
One of my colleagues actually brought up to me today the idea of Regents changing to that point, Teddy. So there has been there's been nothing from state ed yet, but it's something that I think we have to consider. This isn't a 1-year fix. We're not going to be able to fix it next year. There are going to be gaps that we will have to continue to fill over the next several years. Regardless, one of the things, again, going back to the assessment pieces, I think we have to really think about those kind of pre-assessments when students come in. And I know sometimes they're not valued because it seems like, it's not a grade. But I think we're going to have to really think strategically about how do we get as much information from kids when they hit the ground in the fall, so we can plan.
Peter has a question.
Fred, I just, being a teacher, I gotta say this, that, we are incredibly pushed to the max right now. And I hope and pray that, during your process for dealing with all these additions, for the coming years, that you got to keep teachers in mind. You can't ask everybody to catch everybody up. We need some other ways to do this. And I just hope that's part of the plan.
Yeah, I think, Pete, just to your point, we've already talked about assessment. Let's go back to the assessment piece. And we don't want to over-assess kids either because they're fatigued. But are there things that we can do cross-content? So could an essay give us data for English and social studies? So we're trying to think of strategically ways that we can be creative in getting the data that we need without over-assessing kids, without putting more on teachers, So your point is well taken with stuff we're thinking about.
Right, yeah, and it's not just the assessment piece, it's the, okay, what's after that? You know, so we learn what our shortfalls are ultimately, and then how we're gonna gain that back. Let's just, let's rally around the teachers and, help everybody out, work together.
Yvonne has a question. I just wanted to say something before I go to Yvonne. The other thing is you see this list of ideas around what we'd like to do at the elementary school. We're well aware, just the recovery phase. If you think about this in the context of a crisis, we're going to be in the recovery phase almost all of next year. So it behooves us to dream big and look into the future and be cognizant that we've got a ton of broken legs and broken arms and headaches and all kinds of injuries on the field that we will have to go slow. And the most important thing is the teacher and staff member voice as we work through this process. It cannot be rushed. Rushing it will just make it fail anyway. So it's better to wait and go slow and do pieces as we can and build our stamina, our confidence back up. Yvonne?
I know a lot of parents are concerned that their kids are, for a better term, going to be behind. So what kind of standard will we be using to assess whether or not a student is behind? Are we going to try to bring them up to the standards we had pre-COVID, or do the goalposts have to move at this point to define, where kids are supposed to be at this point, or how does that work? What does that look like?
Well, I will confess, and again, I rely on Fred. We work really closely with our BOCEs, the 25 schools that are members of BOCEs, and them with other BOCEs, because if we're not lockstep in this, this is a unnavigated territory. And what BOCEs has done, like even when we went to the priority standards, they actually help scaffold and organize some of these things. I think, as I said to Teddy, I think the general consensus has to be everyone's going to be almost in the minus. No one's going to be at 0 or at 15% when they come in. We're going to be a little bit in the minus. So we are going to have to adjust the goalposts and maybe change the game. But BOCES I think they're going to be a guiding force to help us because we're all in the exact same boat. I'm on the calls every week. Nobody's saying, we got this, no problem. We figured it out. Our kids are just fine. We're all using the same words. And Yvonne, I guess to that point, we need to do something to be able to project that to families as well, because they all, especially the really involved ones, they have a sense of loss and they're really worried about what's going to happen to their kiddos. So we'll think on our end how we're going to project that out as well.
And not much more to add other than I've met with, there's 3 BOCEs instructional coaches that I've met with. The one I've met with 3 times in the last month and a half to talk about what standards are going to look like. We're going to set aside faculty meetings and staff meetings. So it's not one more thing above and beyond, to Pete's point, to do some of this work for the next 3 months, April, May, and June. So we can start really knowing the standards and prioritize. But I do think, to your point, the communication to families is important. So
Tina has a question. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just curious. The first bullet, I see you've got fluidity between grade levels, but is this still the area that you were proposing during our workshops about the multi-age classroom, the multi-grade classroom?
Yeah, what we realized is since that had been tackled before in the district, people's mind automatically went to 1995 or 2000 or whenever we were doing it, which was a different model, which was one teacher with multiple aged kids all the time throughout the year. And really what we're trying to focus on is we don't want our staff to have to learn 2 curricula. We want them to learn, if they're a second grade teacher, we want them to be a master of their second grade content. And instead, where we would be doing the work is deciding when and how we would move kids when it was needed. So it's got to be teachers who are dedicated to doing that. We wouldn't take all 4 second grade classrooms and have kids go everywhere all over the place. But we had a couple staff members who were willing to participate in that, where they could even teach to their own strengths, or they could teach to the students' strengths. I think that's a benefit, but it's much lower level than, we don't want it to be too complicated. As Pete very wisely said, people do not have the stamina right now to come in the summertime, do 8 days of professional development to learn how to be something they're not. We need a chance to be the people that we are for a year. That would be great. Tina, do you have another question?
Yeah, I guess just to kind of along this line, or maybe this is a broader conversation in terms of the budget as a whole, I think I'm a little concerned, or I don't know where we go with the new interventions that are at the planning stage in regard to budget investment if we don't have measures of whether or not that's going to be a valuable intervention. So I think over the last few years, we've had a number of interventions explained to us, different pyramids and different supports. And, you know, we get to a point where we think we understand that particular intervention, but we don't ever seem to follow through to the effectiveness of it, where you then make the informed decision you want to invest more in it because you're receiving truly beneficial results from it. So when we start to introduce something else new, especially in this chaotic period of time, a little more meat on the bones about the value-based thought or the plan for it before it's kind of unrolled. Because last week I was kind of under the impression that was a concrete set in stone, we're going forward. Now it's sounding like it's morphing a bit. So those are just some of the concerns that come to mind to me when we start to have these discussions. And what is the next expectation after the budget vote? Because this may be the only time that we hear it in the planning phase. Next stage is the evaluative stage, whether or not you're getting the results you want.
Well, it is worth noting that all the things that are on that page, only the area in the bright yellow will have any budgetary impact at all. So the other ones, including the possibility of teachers collaborating to help students who are at various levels, will have no budgetary impact. We're using existing staff. It just becomes a matter of whether or not we believe we're ready to do those partnerships, whether people feel professionally ready and have done the training. And the measurement will truly be whether or not, when we get to the end of the year, we achieved students being on or near grade level, regardless of the intervention that we do. So I know that it's not concrete around, to your point, it's talking specifically about what happens when two teachers work together, but every single one of our teachers is going to be doing credit recovery, no matter which, element of the program they're working in. What I wanted to highlight here is that the reinstatement of the PBO positions, the project problem-based learning coach and the STEAM stations doesn't have a financial impact, but the fact that we want our students to go out and to explore a little bit more broadly does. So what we're proposing is to add $5,000 to what would have been our field trip monies. It's about $2,500 additional each building, allowing our students to go out into the world and do some more learning off-site. So out of all of the elementary proposals, this is the sum total of the additional beyond the professional development equipment, furniture, technology, supplies that we already have in our budget. Any other questions about elementary?
So just again, to reiterate, the one-to-one program, we all have, we've had to push that along. So the technology at our middle school and the integration, as you probably remember, our middle school was a little bit ahead because we had started there years ago and kind of started slowly with Chromebook carts. So they were ready to do some of that. Our fifth graders who had the least amount of experience have been doing really well with their Chromebooks as well. For multi-tier systems of support, really that focused on social emotional health for our students in middle school. In addition to Close Gap, which Dr. Bailey mentioned, they also implemented a program called Character Strong. So it helped to kind kind of supplement second step, which was really only hitting some classrooms. And Character Strong really is that community building character education program. It really, one of the main reasons why we adopted it was because students were not feeling that sense of community, especially virtually. And we wanted to make sure that they did. So Character Strong had a very strong component with that. They also participate in our mental health partnership with Northern Rivers. And we have celebrated a couple of times their designation as a no place for hate. So kudos to the middle school for the work that they're doing around social emotional health. The counseling program at our middle school, especially for this past year, created virtual counseling office hours for parents so they could really increase and more effectively communicate with families. They also created for students virtual and in-person classrooms. They were actually pushing into classrooms to continue the delivery of career exploration using that program that we talked about with Naviance, and then also to do some work with Character Strong and Second Step for social emotional learning as well. One of the things we wanted to mention was that in our budget for last year, we had put in for a part-time dean. We approved that, but due to the pandemic, we did not hire that position. And similarly, the funds allocated for the programs were already within our 2021 will continue in our 22 year budget.
Tina, your hand is up. Did you have a question?
That was from before.
Okay. Here's the compressed version of the focus areas that the middle school presented to the Budget Advisory Committee, specifically around the needs of our students in grades 6 through 8 over the next 2 years. And again, as you read through the next 2 slides, feel free to ask any questions around them. And as we go on to the next slides, it is these bulleted items one at a time. So again, I won't spend too much time on this slide. As a reminder, we had some concerns about escalating student behaviors last year. And both, as Fred said, the creation of the dean position was one step, and some of the social emotional supports that we're interested in putting in place are other forms of measurement and prevention and intervention in order to mitigate some of those behaviors. I also want to note that some of these ideas will be subject to collective bargaining. In other words, we do need to meet as committees to try and develop what these things might look like. But in order for them to come to fruition, because they might be bound by contract, we would need to sit down with a bargaining unit and talk through the logistics and determine whether we can come to an agreement. For instance, like a change in a school schedule, that's a collective bargaining issue. So know that some of the things that you may see here may be subject to that. Does anybody have any questions about these? In a way, we may have fewer and fewer questions because the future presentations of the other buildings are an extension of what we've been talking about at the elementary level. As I mentioned at the beginning, some of these items are multi-year in implementation. As a for instance, if I were going to teach algebra to every 8th grade student, I would really need to adjust my 6th and 7th grade curriculum now to ensure that every student was prepared to arrive there. So bringing credit-bearing high school coursework into a middle school is a 2 to 3 year implementation. Similar to what the elementary schools have done, both the middle school and high school are focused on translating their libraries into vibrant spaces where staff and students can come together and learn a little bit differently. So you see learning commons there, very similar to what the elementary and high school are interested in doing. Out of all of the proposals for the middle school, the only ones that have any impact on salary or cost is, and I do want to read a quick explanation around a sensory room because it's not very self-explanatory, but you may have heard of de-escalation rooms that are used sometimes for students with emotional concerns. And a sensory room, it's designed for individuals who may or may not have sensory needs. And what it does is it helps the brain reduce negative reactions to external stimulus. Any of you that fidgets while you're listening or plays with a pencil or, has an actual fidget device can understand this. You bounce your leg. Fred's a leg bouncer. He'll admit that. Some students, it's a pathway for them to calm, a pathway for them to learn. And although the middle school has some sensory spaces right now, they don't have adequate supervision for students who are in that place who need to do their calming and lower the stimulus, et cetera. So the proposal is that we hire a building aide who can help supervise that. That's the $32,000 along with their benefits. Similar to the elementary school, we want to increase the opportunity for students to go off-site by $5,000. And last year, the board approved of a summer credit recovery program for the high school. And we know that we're going to have middle school students who are in the same boat. We would like to build the same type of credit recovery program for them. It could be instruction, direct instruction. It could be using credit recovery software or a partnership of the two. The needs at the elementary or middle school age are a little different than the high school, but there'd be some development around that program, and this is a program we could turnkey and implement this summer in order to help our kids get back on track. Bray.
Can I just back up to the sensory room?
Yes, sir.
I hope that staff member is going to have like a regular full-time assignment, because I can't imagine that that's going to be a full-time job managing the sensory room. There's got to be, are they going to be like an aide that you can send to the sensory room when you need to? Because what else would they do by themselves in there all day?
The way this works in the elementary school is exactly that. We do have a de-escalation room at the elementary, and that aide is assigned somewhere else. They call over the radio, and the person goes to the location where they are needed. So you're exactly right, Bray, that there will be other tasks that are assigned.
Okay.
I apologize. I heard someone raise their hand, but I can't see it. No?
I think it was me trying to turn mine off. Sorry.
Unraising. Unraising makes a noise too. All right. Any more questions about the middle school? Okay. Quick highlights around the work that high school, the large-scale efforts that we've talked about a great deal at the board level. And again, I'm going to go through each one individually, so I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. We often talk about the data around these particular programs, so we wanted to dig into the data a little bit with you today. We began, sorry, I don't know why that says 2918, my apologies. We began both reach out rooms and Operation Graduation at the same time, 2018-19 school year. And we did it with existing FTE, with existing staff. So we didn't hire new staff. There was some training around it, professional development, but no new staff. Since its inception, it served 194 students, and you can see the breakdown of current enrollment. And it is worth noting these numbers of enrollment in the reach out rooms are significantly higher than they have been in the past. Because not only do students who have failed 2 or more classes, are they considered to go into this space or have chronic absenteeism issues. Over the course of this year, as you would imagine, a lot of students have demonstrated that they are struggling. So as this has happened, the counselors and the staff have shepherded kids into this program, and you can see the magnitude of it now. It's a lot of kids involved. The good news is approximately, you need 22 credits to graduate from high school from RCS. You need 5.5 to become a sophomore. You need 11 to become a junior. You need 16.5 to become a senior, and you need 22 to graduate. The list of students there that are on grade level is really good. That means that they were able to turn things around, get to where they needed to, and earn the credits that they needed. If you look right below at the percentage of students who earned 5.5 credits or more in those 2 years, we had a good discussion around this earlier because I was asking, how can you have 63% or 74% only earn 5.5, but you have so many students on grade level? What we know is credit recovery using things like Apex, reach out rooms, Operation Graduation are not the only interventions. A student could have done the first half of a course again and received a passing grade, and they would have been moved on to the next level. They could have completed an Apex in the summertime and moved to the next grade level, or they could have done some other work during the school year to have passed the class. And the results of graduates so far, 20 graduates, 3 of whom graduated in January. They actually did early, and 1 student's dropped out. Questions about the data? Operation Graduation, same. So these students are students who either repeated a grade in middle school or have demonstrated failure almost across the board. So they're failing more than 2 classes. They're failing most of their classes. And the difference between the two is reach out rooms offer students a 1 period a day or every other day where they get some academic support, some social emotional support, and some communication with families to push them. Operation Graduation is more intensive. There's a home base. Some of the core courses are taught by teachers to the cohort, so they're not necessarily mainstream for their courses. They might be in a cohort, Operation Graduation, 11th grade English. So it's much more focused instruction on this intimate group because we know they struggle a little bit broader. And they may need some social emotional attendance support in addition to their academic support. So I asked the question, we've done it since 2018-19, and we began with a freshman class. So the students enrolled were freshmen. And then in 1920, we added 10th graders to the program so that the program could follow the kids as they were getting older. And this year, we included 11th grade so it could follow the kids as they went into 11th grade. And I asked, why are there 2 seniors? We've only done it for the 3 years. And the answer is those students made their credit recovery. They were supposed to be the grade ahead the entire time. And now they're where they're supposed to be. So we're really proud of the work of the students that are in here. So although there are no graduates yet, the big news is those 10th graders have done their catch up. Since we started, we've had some students who have dropped out. And the majority of students who have dropped out in their first year. So in other words, they joined in their freshman year or their sophomore year. They were already old enough to leave school. That means they were beyond the year in which they turned 16. So they're definitely kids that were held back in middle school or elementary school because they were old enough as ninth graders to leave us. So we know, when students fall behind before they get to high school, it's really hard for them to turn it around. Any questions about OG? Again, this program was based on existing staff. It had no additional cost, but similar to what we were proposing with the partnerships with the elementary grades, it's a different way of thinking about how we're deploying our staff so that we can try and meet the needs of kids who are suffering the most. And we can really buzz through the rest of these. It states right where they are there. Basically, PM school students who are school phobic, chronically absent, suspended, or transitioning between home instruction and back to school. And in some rare cases, we might have students who are in both school during the day and in PM school. But it's important to know that enrollment is limited to 16 kids right now. Apex is the credit recovery software that we've talked about. It can be used at both the middle school and high school. And we've had some successes with it. We're very pleased with the success. Last year, we had 17 students enroll, and all 17 regained their credits coming into this year. And we had a summer event 2 years ago. We obviously didn't have one last year. And what we learned from it was too long a day. It was in August, and our 8th to 9th graders were wilting by the time we got to the end. But what they did while they were there is they did team building. They got some coaching. They better understood the ground rules from when they showed up. They got a tour. I think it's much better for them to be focused on in that way than when we just come over from the middle school on some day in June and they do a quick run around, get a little time in the auditorium, and then they come back. So we're interested in ways at very little expense to try and maybe do shorter experiences in the summertime to be able to ease their transition. And lastly, and even some board members have talked about this, our counselors have been doing junior meetings in person and virtually, and we've gotten extremely positive feedback from our families, trying to improve our communications with the constituency, the people that we serve. And it's served us very well, and I think it's given people a clearer vision of where we want our kiddos to go going into their senior year and beyond. And the very last thing, really quickly, we had 17 kids on our work-based job sites last year before things got shut down. And it's also important to note we have 7 of our graduates who have been hired to work at TCI of New York. They're over in the Port of Coeymans, and they've been such a great partner with us. They've sponsored a number of things. They've done some career work with us. But the fact that they've hired on 7 of our graduates in the last 3 years is just amazing. Dr. Paterni talked about one of the kiddos coming in and waving his check and saying, I just got $500. I haven't gotten that much money in my entire life, and I got it in one paycheck. So it's exciting to see these kids transition into the world. And we did not hire the dean of students, the part-time dean of students that was programmed. Okay. Here are the focus areas for the high school. And the action items are broken into some overarching areas for the high school. And I'm going to qualify again right up front. These action items, we worked on them within the Budget Advisory Committee and based on our discussion. But the planning for these will begin this spring and go through the summer into next year. And a few of them might make it through to 21-22. But most of them will not be fully implemented until 22-23, and some of them not even until 23-24. But as much as I've been talking about 5-year planning, which is now 3 years now, I've been talking about 5-year planning with internships, volunteerism, career exploration. We're actually seeing some movement. We want to do these things, but if we're not planning now for 3 years from now, we'll be here 5 years from now and we'll still be saying, hey, let's do this in 5 years. So there's a level of bravery here. There's a reach to a lot of these things. And similar to the middle school, some of these are, they're going to require a lot of help from the people who work here to develop them. Our community is going to have to design and plan, identify and implement, figure out the measurements around it, professionally develop, and then make scheduling adjustments so we can pull it off. So we're going to talk about big ideas, and they're on the screen here, but please know you're not going to see them when we open the door, not all of them in September. What questions do you have about what's up there? I'm going to be blunt a little bit too. Going back to Pete's statement, teachers are fatigued. We're not at our best. Not a one of us, teacher or not, is at our best right now. So I think there's a little bit of fear involved in all the proposals that we've talked about so far. It doesn't matter the grade level. But the important thing to know is we're very clear about where the budget allocations are. And we're very clear about the timeline that we need to follow, which is as extended as we need to be to do it right and to make sure that people feel comfortable within the process. So I want to talk about the budget implications. Very straightforward, similar to every other building. The current budget at the high school for any type of field trip, whether it be extension of a classroom or transformational around career development, is $5,000. Knowing that we will have more students in the workplace, we have a work-based learning coordinator who was recently certified. We hope to increase our number of students who are out in the workplace. We've increased our budget for offsite learning appropriately. For as far as alternative education, we talked about APEX. APEX is pretty good. It's not perfectly aligned with New York State standards. We are looking at, I'm sorry, licenses is spelled wrong. Is that how you spell licenses? We will be looking at some other programs that maybe align with the New York State curriculum better and will serve our students and staff a little better. We're not sure of the expense. It's a BOCES aidable expense at about 46%. So the money that you see there is new money that would be aidable if and when we secured that program. And lastly, our art programs are bursting at the seams. We had 2 art teachers when I came here in 2010. I think about 2014, we had a reduction, difficult budget year, reduction in staff due to retirement. And our belief is that by reinstating the art teacher, we'll be able to, we've got a new vibrant teacher who's really garnering some excitement around the program. That we'll be able to expand the program and also to be able to utilize this person for some of our career-based work. We've been talking about partnerships with the business department around marketing. We've been talking about publishing and doing advertising. We've got an art teacher right now in our midst who is, trained and ready to do this kind of work. But because she's spending almost all of her time teaching the rudimentary art classes, we're not having an opportunity to really capitalize on her. So our sole proposal from the high school is the $80,000 improvement in that staffing. So sum total of $100,000. Joanne mentioned where we are right now budgetarily. So here it is on one sheet, so you can see it. Overall, we are interested in increasing our offsite learning monies by $20,000. Those are our field trips. Technology, specifically around the credit recovery software, and one that better suits our needs. And then staffing between what we asked for at the middle school and what we just asked for at the high school is $112,000, and that's in addition to our existing staffing numbers. So on the right side, you can see the current budget allocations for all those lines. Any questions? So even with these proposals, we are still well under what we had expected for expenditures. These things I've just talked about are not reflected in the budget Joanne shared with you earlier. They would be added in, and we will still be below our expected expenditures for next year. There are two more items I wanted to speak to you about. At the beginning of the presentation, I talked about our desire to increase and improve our communication in the district, the way that we were communicating and relating to our community as a whole. And we did that by partnering with BOCE's what we call a Tier 4 investment. And Tier 4 communications gives us 4 days in person with someone from their communications office and who is available on other days. They update our website, they cover in-district events, and assist with all of our communication as a community. So I do a portion of all those COVID notifications. Our communications person does a portion on our website. What we would like to do is we see some value in us migrating some of our communications back to a district employee. We would drop down to a Tier 1 service with BOCE's, which would be a significant decrease in cost, which would still give us access to a person there to help as a liaison, but it would also still give us the full power of their production house. As I mentioned, calendars, budget newsletters, and the like. We want that. That is a fantastic house to be affiliated with. But if we were able to bring someone in-house, we would be able to fully control the person's schedule. We would allow them the training that we want. They'd be working with the platforms that we would like. And working with BOCE's has taught us over these last 3 years a lot about what we want as a district, and they've done a pretty good job at that. And we're ready to take on some of those responsibilities ourselves. We would like to have the majority of this work in-house. What I expect through this proposal is actually a sum total of $2,500 increase. So the difference between what we would pay to BOCE's to participate in Tier 1 and to hire our own employee inside after aid would be approximately a $2,500 increase. You have questions about this proposal? This would be a civil service position called a communications specialist. Usually someone who has training in communications or marketing, and they have to come with both an educational background in that and having served some capacity in that role before they'd be eligible to take a civil service test within that class.
So does that mean we're getting rid of the communications specialist we use now?
He would be reduced to being a liaison 1 day a week.
So then would that reduce our cost there?
Yeah, that's how I came up with the difference.
Oh, that's it.
Yep. This time would be reduced to 1 day a week, and we'd still have access to all the BOCE's production services and their communication services, which, to be frank, the pandemic, the communications that came from BOCE's was extremely helpful, keeping our feet on the ground. But it's true for a lot of things. If we have a district emergency, we have an unfortunate death in our community, they're there for us to help with those particular things, and they have a lot of stock responses to help us get to where we need to go. It really would be the best of both worlds. That's how we perceive it. Any other questions? The district was very receptive and articulate about when we moved to an assistant director for student support services and what they expected from that person in the role and what they expected moving forward. We wanted to talk through what we believe we've accomplished in the year that we've had the person, even in the pandemic. But forward, Britt's going to help out a little bit in talking through some of the things that we've done. And we're only 2 slides from the end, so we're in a pretty good place right now.
I'm going to talk about Colleen in front of Colleen a little bit, just because this position, she's a huge asset. This role has become a great asset to the district as well. So you'll see numbers. There's the numbers around CSE meetings. So Ms. Agustinoni in her position obviously supported a lot of those meetings in that providing services or finding services for students with IEPs. That position really, and Colleen in that position built and sustained partnerships with outside agencies. Part of that role, when we talked about it, was bringing in professional development for administration leaders. So she has done that. We've started a work with Jim Wright around MTSS, multi-tier systems of support. As I mentioned, we started the restorative practices, professional development as well. And then also this year, which was great, a surprise around professional development for literacy and our younger learners, especially for our self-contained classrooms. But our general ed reading teachers also saw some of this and has been gravitating this for intervention as well. So she was great in bringing that to our district. She has an active role with our counselors, social workers, psychologists, our support staff, nurses, works with us as administrators regularly on programming within the buildings. Out of the number of meetings, I think by the end of the year, about close to 300, if I'm right, will be meetings that Colleen has facilitated. So a lot of meetings, and that's even including, as Dr. Bailey said, our psychologists taking some of the meetings because of that absence that we have currently. What else? The communication piece, I think, is huge. I think we've been able to, one of the things that we've talked about in the past before this position was some inconsistencies with communication. And I think we've seen stronger communication coming from the department, not only inter-district, so that communication with administrators, special ed teachers, student support staff, but then also with our outside placement programming as well. I feel like there's a stronger connection with our outside placement programming. In all of that, in addition to all of that, Colleen was able to take on teacher evaluations. She's done at least 24 observations, which all of the leadership could just nod their heads and say they're time consuming. So being able to do that. And then in addition to that, she's followed up with teachers, given them some coaching tips, and then, suggested needs for improvement as well.
Going forward, we were hoping that the building principals have taken a lot of ownership over our counseling department, K-12, and Chris and I have been doing a lot of work with them this year. That really is a portion of our school district that belongs under student support services. We'd like to extend that under that umbrella as well as the continuing work around multi-tiered systems of supports. It's both social, emotional, and academic, and our student support services staff are so well suited to that. So here's the punchline around that. As I mentioned earlier, we moved a staff member from a teacher to an instructional assignment. So in other words, they were in the teacher contract, they worked teacher hours, and they worked 10 months a year, plus some additional days because they were paid to do that work. They could not run meetings with staff. They could run CSE meetings, but there was no articulation or facilitation beyond that. In the past year and change, Colleen has worked 12 months a year, extensive hours, well beyond the school day. She has supervised staff and evaluated them, and the cost of the district has been about $20,000. The return for her doing that work has far outweighed the investment that we've made. And what we are asking for is the district, and about 10 years ago, the model that we had when we had fewer students in special education was a director and an assistant director. What we're asking the board to do is please consider allowing us to continue to support this position as a leadership position so that all of the other things that are done within the role can get done. I think it has significantly changed the timbre of the work we're doing for our students with disabilities. And they do deserve the best service that we can provide them. So we're not asking for any new money. We're asking to continue the dedication of that money that we did last year. So those two proposals together is $2,500 to bring communications in-house and the maintaining of our assistant director for student support services. Are there any questions?
So does that mean we're just going to continue on with what we've got until our director retires and then post the position? Is that the plan?
That's what we would do, Bray. And, you know, we would prefer, as we were able to do this time, it's to our benefit to be able to promote from within. When we do that, that actually ends up it's a gain in the knowledge we're inheriting, if we can do it. But it's also usually a gain in breakage, because we have usually experienced staff who are coming into these positions, and we rehire, and we're actually hiring someone in at a lower cost. That there's no guarantee that there is somebody who has the preparation to do it. They need to have their school district leader certificate, which is a special certification that many of us have. But there are a few people in district, and they may choose to do it. That is all. We gave you a lot of information. And I want you to know also that there is a ton of information. There's a lot of descriptions about each of these programs within this presentation that I'm going to share with you, and we'll post publicly so people can see a little more detail about it. Of course, I've shared the budget Budget Advisory Committee presentations after we've done them each time. And that's a lot of information to look through too. So if you wanted to go back and look through any of these proposals, action proposals for any of the buildings, there actually are some descriptions in these slides. And I'll be sharing them with our staff as well tonight, so that ideally it'll answer some of their questions around what we're thinking about. But like I said, the most important thing that we need to convey to our staff is we're going to move at the pace we can. We're going to be receptive to people's needs right now, as they are just hoping to get back to some normality as we go into next year. That's a underlying message. Is there anything else that you would like us to think about as we go into the next meeting 2 weeks from now?
I guess I'm still just a little concerned about the tax cap and going out at zero and not handcuffing us years down the road here. I don't.
Yeah.
And Bray, I'll show you what we can do with that. I'll show you a comparison where we've been, what the limit has been, what we've gone out at, and we can show how that impacts us going forward. But I'll prepare that. I already made a note for myself, and we're already working on it for the 14th.
Okay.
And the other thing the board will have continuing conversations about, which we talked about at the beginning, the CARES Act 3 money is also going to be complex. We're going to be inheriting a whole bunch more money with no outline about how we're able to use it. And it is not a benefit. I mean, to your point, Bray, it was not a benefit to say, we're going to drop taxes by 20% this year because we have $2.3 million coming in. That's just, it's impossible. No school will survive under those circumstances. So they haven't given us the parameters around how we can use CARES 3 money yet. We hope they do soon, and that'll answer a ton more questions about how we proceed safely so that we're able to go 10 years as a district and not hit this fiscal cliff and disappear into the abyss, which is, you know, what you're alluding to. All right. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time and your excellent questions. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Have a fantastic vacation.
Have a nice Easter, everybody.
Stay out of
Thank-
quarantine.
Bye.
Trying.